Hello, everybody. My name's Tatiana Moroz. I'm a singer-songwriter, and I find myself at the cross-section of technology with these wonderful panelists who I'll introduce in just a moment. I'm actually going to let each of them do their own introduction so I don't butcher it, but I'd love to give you a little bit of quick information as to how I ended up here. I'm a singer-songwriter. I grew up in New Jersey. I went to Berkeley and Boston, and along my journey, what I really wanted to do with my music was have some kind of a meaning to it. And I really loved the music from the 60s and 70s that promoted such great change. When I found out about Bitcoin, it took me down the cryptocurrency rabbit hole. And I realized that this was our best chance for not only a creatively bright future, but more of a bright future for humanity by taking back the power of money. And I never thought that I would find it interesting, but I have. So I went on to create the world's first artist cryptocurrency, Tatiana Coin, which allows artists to be directly supported by their fan base so they can work on different projects, like a slight improvement over some kind of an Indiegogo with more features. Since then I worked in this space. I have 2 different podcasts. I have the Tatiana Show and also Proof of Love Cast. And I'm working on my 4th album, also working with Token.fm, which is the platform that we built to bring those solutions to the masses. I'm really excited to be leading this panel. So I'll just go right down the line. Hold on one second, I have things over here. It's a little bit awkward doing this, so hopefully you guys will forgive me. Actually, you know what, why don't we go with ladies first? I'm old-fashioned. Shelita Burke. Oh, do I have to unmute you, or who's the muter? Oh.
I am here.
Oh, great. Thank you.
I'm a music artist. I'm a data scientist. I'm a technologist. I'm an entrepreneur. As many of you here today are many things. I am many things. I exist to elevate consciousness in all humanity, whether it's through technology, whether it's through music. Those are just vehicles to elevate consciousness, because whatever you put your attention to is what brings awareness, and awareness brings elevation of consciousness.
Very cool. Thank you so much. Brian, can you please give everybody an introduction? You have such a cool background. I was reading your bio.
Yeah, hi, I'm Brian Behlendorf. My day job, the thing I get paid to do, I guess, is be executive director of something called Hyperledger, which is a consortium of different companies and software developers building foundational technologies in the blockchain space. A little bit distant from the cryptocurrency stuff, although it really is a spectrum. Our stuff gets used for supply chain traceability or for digital identity needs or all sorts of financial applications. And it's kind of, the predominant platform out there for that kind of thing. We're part of the Linux Foundation, which is a larger consortium of organizations working together on software of all sorts, right? But my background and in some ways my heart is really in the music space. In 1992 launched an email mailing list, it sounds so archaic, but for the rave scene in San Francisco, and that became one of the first websites called Hyperial. And it was never a commercial thing. It was always just about people sharing their love of going out to listen to electronic music, and it was regional, but kind of grew beyond that. But that was always kind of a nonprofit kind of thing. And kind of following that through my career, I've always been about openness, always been about open source software, always about sharing information and like collaborating, remixing, that sort of thing. So I've always been a supporter of like the Creative Commons and the Internet Archive, and I'm on the board right now of the Mozilla Foundation and the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and they're really thinking about digital rights and how to build distributed systems has been a big focus kind of throughout these different areas. So lots to talk about in terms of how blockchain technology can be used to positively impact that.
Well, thank you. By the way, I like the FF. Thumbs up. Okay, great. Next we have Gene Hoffman. Gene Hoffman was the co-founder of eMusic and the youngest CEO of NASDAQ, but the reason why I'm giving him a semi-introduction is because Chia actually sponsored my Crypto Stars event that I had last year at Consensus. So it was a mix of musicians and comedy. So I just wanted to say thank you for supporting my event. Gene, welcome to the panel. If you could introduce yourself, we'd love that. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. So first, let me talk about Chia. Chia is a cryptocurrency that's in beta for its release towards the end of this year. It is Bram Cohen's attempt to become a more efficient cryptocurrency that uses less electricity for more security, kind of per security unit, and also a platform for a whole new smart transaction environment called Chia Lisp, which is highly auditable and will make cryptocurrencies actually easier to use than banking, which they aren't really now. My quick background and why it's all relevant, I co-invented internet ad blocking in the late 90s, sold that to PGP Inc. And so I've kind of been in the edge of crypto and music for a very, very long time. At PGP, helped ship the first commercial version of PGP for PGP Inc. and ended export controls and cryptography. I was the second person to officially export PGP. We now know that you can fill a $20 form out or be open source and just ship crypto. So that's been an important change. When PGP was sold to McAfee, I went to my now wife and said, honey, this cryptocurrency stuff is critical. It's a civil rights issue. It needs to happen. We'll do well doing it, but Xiaomi and digital cash, which was state of the art at the time, meant that we'd probably live on a deserted desert island surrounded by armed guards. My wife said, can we go back to the United States? And the answer was probably not. So I founded this little company that became emusic.com. We licensed 15% of the world's music, helped launch the iPod after Universal Music acquired us, helped launch iTunes Music Store as you know it today. Then bought a boat, took some time off, made a big subscription infrastructure company that basically supported everybody but Netflix and Spotify, so the NBA and others. Sold that about 4 years ago. And when my friend Bram was talking about a better way to do proof of work instead of doing proof of work, doing proof of space and time, I said we need to talk because we were both in the same VC portfolio and hung out at founders events. So that brings us to present. As I said, we're going to launch a new cryptocurrency that does the very hard thing of actually improving on what exists out there. Most things that have tried that have not necessarily been going forward, they've been going backwards. So I think that kind of gives you a good intro, and I'll turn it back to you.
Well, thank you so much. That was a very good intro. Thank you, everybody. So I wanted to talk a little bit. I know that we're talking about cryptocurrency, but some of the things that brought me to cryptocurrency were the challenges in the music industry. I went to Berklee College of Music. I managed different recording studios. I was in the right place, right time, very good work ethic. But I still find music to be extraordinarily difficult to survive. I mean, we had different challenges before. Now we have the do-it-yourself innovation. What do you think are some of the, or like do-it-yourself movement, what do you think are some of the challenges that have been resolved? And what do you think the challenges are in the future? And maybe relate that back to crypto, if there even is a crypto solution. But more specifically, like, what do you think is the biggest thing that blocks an artist from having a sustainable career?
Well, I think, there was this sense in the late 90s and early 2000s that artists would be able to go direct. And at the time, I think it was one of those classic things where there were a whole bunch of internet ideas that were way too soon. Pets.com was a thing that went kaboom. But now, it's actually completely normal that my dog food shows up routinely off an internet order. You've gone to this world, and I mean, the pandemic has added to this. All of a sudden, you don't even have to necessarily tour to tour. I think you've kind of changed the ability, especially again with this kind of accelerating event where here we are all around the globe but meeting together. The thing that cryptocurrency could add as it gets more massively adopted is taking away both the deplatforming risk that you have of PayPal going, I don't like your content, right? And making it much easier for an individual or small group to actually, build something, make it for pay, and collect dollars, or euros or whatever. So I think we're finally kind of at that point where a lot of the promise of the internet in the music business is finally, scaled up enough, and that the, social comfort with using the internet as a means of entertainment for live events and those kinds of things, all of a sudden is somewhat real.
I think that artists are required in today's world to be marketers. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that artists have. Also, money is an exchange of value, and cryptocurrencies and digital currencies alike allow artists to get rid of the middleman when it comes to right payments for the right holders of the music asset. And it also allows them to get rid of bankers, because in certain cryptocurrency frameworks, you can take out the banker and the middleman and to directly transact the exchange of value between the artist and the fan. And the more we get to a place where there's more transparency in that world, where you don't have all these middlemen taking pieces of the pie, I think that creates a more fair and more equitable situation for artists around the globe at scale in ways that tangible money does not. And the way our current money system works in terms of royalty payments and how artists get paid now for the actual music asset, but that also extends into ticket sales, like how artists get paid currently for ticket sales. There's a lot of scams going around ticket sales and things like that. And when the fan gives their dollar or they give their money to the artist, they don't know where it's going. And when you have a technology like blockchain where you can transact in a way where you can see all the transactions, it creates a different type of behavior of transparency where you don't really have that accountability before. And so that's where I see cryptocurrency existing in the artist space in terms of providing solutions. However, that's just one Band-Aid on bigger Band-Aids in terms of where the world is going. And I think that when the world is changing and evolving like it is every day, like the sun rises every day, that music is so powerful and artists have such a big responsibility to carry the weight of the emotions and the weight of the time through music, the vehicle of music, that when we get to this world where we're moving away from money, paper money, and we're moving away from digital currency and currency as a totality, we're going to be moving towards a cashless society and also a moneyless society. And when we get to that place where money becomes this obsolete vehicle, then it'll be a very different landscape for how artists are compensated for what they're doing. And so what I think the world needs to think about as a whole, as a humanity together, is how do we create a world where people value music differently than they do now? And when we do that, that creates an equitable situation for artists in ways we haven't been doing in the past. So I think it's a question of awareness and elevating that awareness in terms of where artists sit in terms of the value that's being exchanged.
Yeah, to build on Shelita's point, I think it's partly about trying to eliminate the middleman before the burden that they place upon these transfers, right? But when Zoe Keating has been really compelling on this front. I'm sure many of you have kind of read her posts over the last few years where she's talked about getting millions and millions of plays on YouTube and getting checks that could barely cover lunch, right? In terms of compensation for that. And there's a lack of transparency. There's a lack of understanding, what is that flow, and YouTube isn't the only kind of issue here. If anything, they're probably better than the kind of royalty check she gets out of the blue from her other kind of recordings and works that are being played out there and on other vehicles, for which she has really no visibility into how many plays, what's the rates. She has no bargaining rights as well over asking for those royalty rates to come up, those sorts of things. And so it's that lack of transparency that really is, I think, the burden, not just the skimming off the top that the middlemen are taking. But then there's, I think, really at the heart of it is who owns the metadata, right? Who owns the information about, and this is something that Imogen Heap has actually been really compelling about. She's had a project for a couple of years called the Musician's Passport, where what she's really looked at has been, and this has evolved to especially in the last year, to really focus on, how do you give an artist agency over the data about the works that they've created or participated in the creation of? How do you give them the ability to track that, to share that, and to prove this to other people, right? For somebody who's famous like Imogen, this is probably not as much of a challenge, but if you are a remix engineer kind of working on different tracks, you have a right to have whatever IP you've created, whatever creative input you've given, tracked with those objects as they flow out there in the rest of the world. And doing that in a way that isn't centralized on a single rights management agency or a central database to keep track of, because we all know as technologists, we can go in and edit those databases to say anything they want. There's no integrity to those databases and built into them, right? And for artists, that has meant, they've been deprived of the ability to have a sense of agency over that data and to even correct it. Imogen has several examples of where the data the rights agencies were tracking and pushing out to Spotify and others was just incorrect, right? And she had no ability to even correct it, let alone have a sense of ownership over it. And so one of the things that has really exploded in the blockchain space, aside from kind of the cryptocurrency side, is a reinvention of the approach to digital identity, moving away from this notion that your identity is tied to a name and password you have on a server at like Google or Facebook or Amazon or wherever, and instead your identity is a collection of documents you hold in a wallet that survive whatever websites come and go, whatever issuers of these credentials come and go. You've got these documents and you can always present them and use them in a way that people can verify the integrity of, right? Using, like Gene will know, using blockchains essentially as a public key repository, but even more, using that for timestamps, using that to verify this integrity. And that's something that have impacted far beyond the music space, but I think that's the thing here that will create the most value for artists is giving them that agency back over their information.
Yeah, to add, I think a lot of folks are unaware of how important digital identity and distributed digital identity is going to be based on blockchain infrastructure. This is a real technology, and all of a sudden you're able to attest to who you are and what you have kind of attested about you in a way that doesn't necessarily disclose it to everybody. You only get to choose and pick how you disclose those things. And so all of a sudden you can say, I am this artist and I do want you to use this identity, and I sign this list of the metadata that you should use with my works, right? So I think this is kind of a second order effect, and we haven't seen kind of the deployment yet fully of the broad-based cryptocurrencies that are going to make these things much more day-to-day. But a running joke amongst us in the kind of blockchain space is that we had to build a secure distributed database to get banks and governments to actually use public key cryptography, and finally we're going to do that.
I think that, to add on to your point, when it comes to owning your metadata, I think that in today's world, we think in terms of authorship. We think in terms of individuality. However, our future world exists in a way where it's collective consciousness, organizations of people being decentralized, moving as different local communities together, making decisions. And so when I think about that, plus AI, making music, the idea of authorship is going to change. So also the idea of metadata and its place in the world is also going to change. And I think that if we shift our understanding of how music is being authored in terms of who owns it, who doesn't own it, who created it versus who didn't create it, because we're going to have this emergence of AI plus the music creator and all these other tools plus the music creator, it creates this world where it's hard to know who owns that. And when that happens, how do you insert value inside of the person who initiated the idea? And so when I think of the new world, I think of shared ideas, no authorship, no privacy, actually. I believe in total transparency upon everything because it changes the behavior when everything is transparent. And in that world, the authorship thing would just go out the window, and it wouldn't be about, oh, these are royalty payments or these are not royalty payments. And metadata will be used differently. And instead of metadata tagging the person on ownership, it'll be tagging the collective community of people who listen and contribute to that music asset beyond just AI, beyond just the technology. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. So shifting gears a little bit, in 2014, I created the world's first artist cryptocurrency so people could invest in an artist and participate in that. Because of various legal restraints, the allowance of that idea to kind of really flourish has been a little bit limited. But do you think that we're going to see, what I'd like to see personally, is a future where investors can invest in artists in that way and then potentially see some kind of a market for that? There's also a lot of innovation around NFTs and making those tradable. but they do need a certain amount of mass adoption in order for those markets to be viable. Do you have any comments on whether or not you see people trading artist coins or artist collectibles in the future and what that might look like?
I think
that might be a good opportunity for artists to create their own new types of value. You spoke about value earlier, but value is kind of subjective, right? And if people are used to paying nothing or, you know, less than a penny for their Spotify stream, it's hard to get them to go back. To me, this is maybe a different way to generate a new type of value for artists and their fans. What do you think? Everyone.
I think in local communities that artist coins could do really well, because when you think about an artist and you think about the indie artist, which is not major label artists, which is not like mass market artists, if you think about local artists and you think about the listenership just in local communities, and you see who's contributing in terms of who's playing that song, if an artist has a coin and every time that song is played within that community, the community contributes to that artist, that could be a marketplace where that can work. At a global scale, you know, when you think about like music platforms like Spotify and SoundCloud and what have you, it would be interesting if SoundCloud and Spotify were to pay out royalties based on the artist coin that you create as the artist, based on the listenership that comes to the platform, because people come to the platform to hear the music. They come to the platform because of the artist. Without the artist, there is no platform. It's not the other way around, you know? And so in that way, I can see artist coins working out if the platforms were to partner with the artists.
I have to say, I probably am more skeptical than most about the ability for cryptocurrencies and even use case specific tokens to actually avoid speculative pressures, right? I think what we saw quite a bit in the ICO push was a lot of very well-heeled investors stepping in, buying large allocations, pumping the market through hype, through buying of exposure, and then exiting at the top and leaving all the people who came in and bought into a vision, holding the bags and having to ride the decline, and sometimes seeing substantial amounts of money, often in many cases, people who could least afford to actually lose that money, go to zero or go to in a very challenging spot. And I think, you know, the regulations that are out there about speculation and about securities and such are there for a good reason, because this is kind of human nature.
Really? Just for one artist though?
No, even for one artist. I mean, the problem is, you know, nothing keeps somebody from stepping in and buying a lot of Tatiana Coin, right? And you know, buying a lot of Google ads, buying a lot of like hype to drive it up to highs, and then quietly and visibly escaping at the top, and then leaving you with this brand reputation issue, which is like, oh my God, like you know, how did this happen? So in something that is more controlled, I mean, where microcurrencies, even before crypto, have succeeded has been when they've been geographically based, you know, where they've been about people who are necessarily part of a community binding together, because in that kind of thing, an interloper from the outside with bags of money can't really affect that system, right? I do believe very strongly that these types of systems can help do what, you know, if you look at the evolution, right, from IUMA, anyone remember IUMA? Early 1990s, right, to, you know, to eMusic, to Bandcamp, to, you know, progressively there have been platforms that have been more and more pro-artist and given a greater share to artists. Those platforms can be decentralized. Those platforms could be turned into systems that don't have somebody at the center setting a hard royalty, but instead communitized infrastructure. And that doesn't require specialized tokens, either per artist or even for the use case. It could benefit from any kind of digital token, and that could be a publicly mined cryptocurrency. It could also eventually be digital dollars, digital euros. I mean, we're going to see those come in the next few years and be as easy to use, as programmable as any other kind of digital money. And so firmly believe in the kind of the communitarian kind of concepts of, hey, let's build systems that are distributed, cooperative. And the good news is we don't need to be subject to the speculators and the market perverters to actually make these systems work in the long term.
Yeah, I'd like to add, I mean, you know, I think there are grand dreams for what a blockchain can do, and there is a cold, harsh reality of what it actually can do. What it actually can do is still extremely compelling, but it's a bit narrower than most people think. And like one of the big problems is what's called the Oracle problem. You know, a lot of people would like a blockchain to make a decision based on something that happens in the real world. Well, the moment a blockchain tries to rely on something that happens in the real world, you now have the core point of failure where everyone can game the system and try to make the blockchain see like the closing price of NASDAQ as half of what it was, so that they then can go exploit some other contract over here. So you have this natural problem of, you know, how does an immutable ledger make a decision based on data that's not on it, right? And that matters here because, you know, what we're kind of talking about are monetizing the individual. And I think there's some interesting kind of trends out there doing this. You know, you've got Lambda School kind of doing reverse education pricing. You know, you've got other folks thinking about how to, you know, financialize in a positive sense people's future careers. But the problem with that is, like, you get into all sorts of weird bad actor possibilities. Like, you know, if you're a rising, I'll use basketball stars to step side of music, you know, you can decide that, well, I cashed out and I'm gonna stop playing. And there's no, you know, kind of.
Aren't there bad actors everywhere? I mean, everybody's always manipulating something. Is Wall Street allowed to manipulate? Is the really big company in Hollywood allowed to manipulate? I mean, there's all sorts of that element there. Why are the artists not able to at least have a fighting chance?
Another concur, it's an incentive issue.
To right. Tatiana's point about creating your own coin, if you think about it in terms of, let's say, when you think about an artist, they're their own economy in a way. And when you create a coin, you're controlling that economy in a different type of way, in ways of transaction. And there's ticket sales, there's merchandise, there's music listenership. And when you go to a place like, if we were to think about it in an analogy sense, like Chuck E. Cheese's, nobody's going to buy like 3 million Chuck E. Cheese tokens. Because you know that, okay, 50 Chuck E. Cheese tokens gets you this ride and some popcorn and some cotton candy. And so in the artist marketplace, if you decide to design the system sort of like a Chuck E. Cheese or Disneyland or, you know, like amusement parks do, in terms of, okay, this many tokens afford you this, and there's no, this token doesn't change in value based on, you know, like market conditions. It changes in value based on the calculations and the system that you put in place. Like Disneyland, this ride is always 5 tickets. You know, our Chuck E. Cheese's, this popcorn is always 10 tickets. And so that, it doesn't eliminate bad actors, but it creates a different way to transact in a way that the artist is the economy, and you're in a localized community, and every time you buy a ticket, it's with the currency of the artist, and every time you buy t-shirts with the currency of the artist, every time you listen to the artist, it's with the currency of the artist. It, as I said, it doesn't eliminate bad actors, but it creates a different way to transact.
Well, and Shelita, that's a great point, so long as those tokens aren't tradable on exchanges.
Yes.
And sadly, most of these crypto tokens that have been created were designed to be bought and sold
but they don't
on exchanges. They don't have to be, but in most cases they have been. So if there's a way to change that, but most of the time, I mean, that would eliminate a lot of speculators coming in, but most of the tokens have been, you know, launched and designed to be publicly traded.
And you can just use the blockchain as a ledger to see all the transactions of the previous customers and the current customers, and how many fans are going to this concert, and how many fans are buying this t-shirt, and you can just use the blockchain as a way of seeing the transparency of what's happening inside that ecosystem, versus, okay, the value is going up every day, let's check on my wallet to see, is it $5 a day, is it $10 a day, you know, which is a different way to transact.
I'd love to address Monica's questions in the chat, not to jump ahead on the agenda, but because they're very germane to this.
We're just running out of a couple. We only have 1 more minute of our time. I don't know how much of an extension we have. I apologize. I don't want to cut anybody off, but at the same time, I don't want to be rude to the following people. Please, everybody, thank you so much for being on this panel. There's obviously a lot more to discuss. I'll probably be reaching out to each of you guys to come on the Tatiana show if you'd be willing. I'd love to explore these ideas more. Please look online and connect with these folks. Any quick, you know, your Twitter handle, like a quick thing, where can people find you? Everybody, panelists.
I'm at Hoffman G on Twitter.
Brian Behlendorf, everywhere. At Twitter, everywhere else.
Yeah, I'm Hoffman G everywhere.
ShelitaBurke.com, everywhere as well.
Thank you. And I'm Tatiana Moroz, your host. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'll see you next time.